Put back on the record at 1:24 p.m. It's the beginning of videotape number 2.
Hi, Mrs. Altmann. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, I am.
Okay. You're still feeling well?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I understand from Mr. Schoenberg that you are interested in trying to conclude this afternoon so that you can go visit a friend who's in the hospital, and so we'll try to move along
That's
as quickly
fine.
as we
It's
can.
perfectly all right.
I also understand that in addition to your friend's illness, you had a friend who recently died day before yesterday.
Yes, yes.
I take it, and you have my condolences on both of
Thank you
those.
very much.
I take it that neither of those events is creating any distraction
No,
for you,
it doesn't.
and it doesn't impair your ability
Not
to
at
give us your
all.
best testimony.
Not at all.
Okay. Let me see if I can just complete the questions I had regarding your receipt of documents from Nellie Auersberg. What was the reason that she provided these documents to you?
It was after my sister's death.
And you requested them?
No, I didn't. but
She
I-
provided them to you in connection with what, as you
We
understand
had
it?
a meeting after she died, and after dinner, her brother was there too, and so she and her husband informed us of and read some of the letters to us.
Was this before or after you became aware of the potential issues relating to the ownership of the Klimt paintings?
I would say it was I would say it was before.
And did Mrs. Auersberg explain to you any reason why she thought you might be interested in these documents?
If she explained me why I might be interested in the document.
Yes. Was there any
Well, she
conversation between
felt-
you on the subject?
She felt that I should be part of the things that my sister had left and that I hadn't seen before.
I see. And did you review any of the documents at that time?
No.
When did you first look at any of the documents?
After Mr. Janine started sending the things.
I'd like to have marked as next in order 58? 58, please. A two-page document marked on the lower right-hand portion of the two pages 000312 and 313.
Thank you.
He'll give you that one, and let me give that to him. Please take a look at this document and tell me if you've seen it before.
I don't recall this particular letter because there came so many, but I'm sure this is what it was.
Okay, let me just identify for the record that this appears to be a letter dated September 28, 1945, from Gustav Klimt, it is in any case on letterhead with his name, to the Directorate of the Austrian Gallery.
Dr. Grimschütz, yes.
Yes. Are you familiar with who Dr. Grimschütz was?
No, except after the documents that I received later on.
You weren't personally acquainted with Dr. Grimschütz from the period during which you lived in Vienna?
Certainly not. I never saw him. I never met him.
You weren't aware whether he was acquainted with your Uncle Ferdinand?
No, I wasn't aware of it.
You aren't aware whether he visited the Palais in Vienna?
No, I was not aware of it.
Before we leave this document has one of the fax trails indicating that it was received from Mr. Chernin. Do you have any reason to believe that this is anything other than one of the copies of correspondence you received from Mr. Chernin as you earlier testified?
Are you talking about Exhibit 58?
I am.
You want me to find out, to remember if I had seen this before?
No, ma'am. I
have.
believe you've already testified that you do not. So you do not remember seeing this document before.
I do not remember.
I asked you. I meant to ask you a different question. You see the fax trail at the top of the first page of the document that's been marked as Exhibit 58?
On the left-hand side on top?
Running across the top of the page, all the way across the top of the page. It starts with 08-01-99. And then it has some more numbers, and then it has the name Chernin-Molden,
Yes.
and then some more numbers.
Yes.
And we've referred earlier in your testimony to a fax trail indicating that a document was sent by facsimile by Mr. Chernin to your counsel, Mr. Schoenberg.
Yes.
Do you recall that testimony that we talked about earlier today?
I suppose so.
Okay. You don't have any knowledge the origin of this document, is that correct?
No.
Let's go off the record for just a second.
Going off the record at 1:33 p.m.
Randy, I have
Going back on the record at 1:43 p.m.
off the record, we reached, well, first we marked a number of letters that have been produced to us in connection with this matter as exhibits 59 through 67 inclusive. In order to save time and in light of Mrs. Altmann's earlier testimony, we have gone through these letters off the record and reached the following stipulation with respect to them. Each of these letters were provided to Mrs. Altmann either through Mr. Chernin as part of the documentation that she received from him through Mr. Schoenberg, as she's testified, from Nellie Auersberg, as she's testified, or through some other source through Mr. Schoenberg in connection with the preparation of this litigation. My understanding is that those documents that bear the Chernin fax line are, to the best of your understanding, Mrs. Altmann obtained through Mr. Czernin. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can I say something? We can include Exhibit 58 in this, and also none of these documents were obtained through Nellie Auersberg. All of them were obtained from Mr. Czernin. Some of them may be faxed and others may have been mailed to me, but all of them in January or afterwards of 1999.
It's a very small group that was obtained so many.
Okay, but you don't personally know from your recollection which documents were obtained from your niece and which documents were obtained through another source. Is that correct?
Well, I think it all of them that says Czernin, it was Czernin, and as far as my nieces, it was only the few things pertaining to the last will of my sister and what she left her.
The documents that Mr. Schoenberg took you through yesterday, I believe he said off the record, were the documents to his knowledge that you'd received from your niece, Nellie Auersberg, and were identified as such yesterday on the record. Can we add that to our stipulation?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think you can tell in many cases from the document itself where it was likely to have come from. So, for example, a letter from her brother Robert to her sister Louisa. That was one that was within the family. That's one that she obtained from her niece Nellie. Documents like these that we've just marked that are clearly from the files of the Bundesdenkmalamt in Austria. Obviously, she didn't get from the family, but got only during the course of discovering documents, and thanks to copies made by Mr. Czernin.
And so our stipulation with respect to these documents is that those that bear the fax trail from Mr. Czernin were obtained from him, that the others were obtained either from Mr. Czernin or some other source than Nellie Auersberg in or after January of 1999, and that Mrs. Altmann was not previously aware of the existence of or the contents of these documents prior to that time. Is that correct?
That's correct for these documents that we've set forth.
That's exhibits 58 through
I should add one caveat.
67. Is that correct?
It's correct as to the originals of the documents. Some of the documents may have been quoted in articles that Mr. Czernin wrote in 1998 that we may have, I'm not sure if we had copies of those before January 99. He had also at one point emailed me, and I don't even know if I had that anymore, a transcript that he had made before he was allowed to make copies of some of the documents. But again, that would be between September 98 and January 99, which I don't think will make much of a difference, but certainly not at no time before September of 98 did either Mrs. Altmann or I have any awareness of these documents.
With that qualification, do I have your stipulation as I put it forward on the record?
Yes, absolutely. I should add, I think I only first made contact with Mr. Czernin around December of 98. Could have been November, but not before that.
Mrs. Altmann, have you previously reviewed any of the documents that were marked exhibits 58 through 67?
Yeah.
Did you see them only in the German version in which you see them now, or did you previously see translations of them into English?
No, I just saw them in the German version.
Is that true of most of the other German language documents we've discussed with you in connection with your deposition?
Well, yes, I read German fluently, so I can read it like that.
So you haven't relied on translations of these documents in
No.
connection with your
No,
review
I
of them?
haven't.
That was a no? I'm sorry, you were speaking when I was
I'm
speaking.
sorry, no.
Thank you. Returning for a moment to the efforts of your brother Robert and Dr. Reinisch after the death of your uncle to obtain the restitution of property. You've testified to some extensive degree that you were not aware of the efforts of Dr. Reinisch or Robert in specific details in attempting to get restitution. That's correct, right?
I don't quite understand your question.
I'll rephrase it. You weren't aware of the specific efforts that were being made by Robert or Dr. Reinisch
Yes.
in order to obtain restitution of the
Correct.
property.
Yes.
You testified that you were aware of nothing directly pertaining to attempts to obtain restitution of the Klimts after World War II, correct?
Would you repeat that question? If I was not aware of
Yeah.
the special Klimt thing, the question about the Klimts?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that you testified yesterday that you were specifically aware of no aspect of Robert and Dr. Reinisch's efforts to obtain any restitution of the Klimt paintings or any actions they took with respect to the Klimt paintings during the years after the war. Is that correct?
I didn't know anything at the time, but from the things that I received later, I saw that it was a total denial of letting any paintings go out. And only when we agreed to leave the Klimt there did we get any paintings out, because the first thing was no paintings go out, none, because they were all Austrian art, and so they wouldn't let anyone go, let any of them go.
The source of that information that you just volunteered was correspondence that you saw in or after 1998.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm just asking you for your direct personal knowledge in the years immediately after World War II, in the 1940s.
Yeah, no, I was not personally involved in that at all.
And I was just confirming my understanding that at that time you were not aware of what was being done with respect to the Klimt paintings either by Robert or Dr. Reinisch.
Correct.
Okay. Now, I had the impression yesterday, and this is the only reason for this line of questions, that you may have had some contemporaneous knowledge during the 40s of efforts that were being made with respect to restitution of other property than the Klimts during that same time period. Is that an accurate impression?
It's all so long ago. I don't remember that. I mean,
as you sit here, you don't recall whether you were aware of efforts that were being made with respect to property other than the Klimt paintings during the 1940s by
it
Robert or
is difficult
Dr.
for me
Reinisch?
to say other or this. I knew there were efforts to be made to get something out. But whether it was the Klimts or the other paintings, I wasn't aware of it.
How about property other than paintings or artwork? Were you aware of efforts that were being made with respect to restitution of any
We got a few
Excuse
little
me, I'm sorry.
China items.
For the sake of the record, if you'd just allow me to finish the sentence.
Sorry.
I know you know where I'm going with these, but the record needs to be complete. Other than paintings or other artwork, were you aware at the time, during the 1940s, of any of the efforts at obtaining restitution of property from your uncle's estate?
The actual efforts that were being made, I was not involved in that, and I wasn't aware of it until I got a few pieces of porcelain.
Okay. I understand from your testimony yesterday that none of your uncle's property in Czechoslovakia was returned to the family. Is that
Nothing.
correct? And this is property that had fallen within the control of a communist government after World War II. Is that correct?
No, it was, excuse me, it was first under the leadership, under the what do you call him, the Heydrich, the one that took over Czechoslovakia.
After the
under
war.
Heydrich, Heydrich. He lived in my uncle's castle, and a lot of the things that were in there, beautiful paintings and porcelain and carpets and whatever, were already taken by him. And so we didn't get anything from that.
My question was for the period after the war.
After the war?
conclusion
No,
of the
I
war?
don't know, because we never went back. I never saw anything from there.
Let me rephrase my question. After the conclusion of World War II
Yeah,
and the defeat of the Nazis,
Yeah.
were efforts made, to your knowledge, to obtain restitution of any of the property from Czechoslovakia?
I suppose my brother did try, but nothing became of it, so I wasn't informed of anything.
Do you know why nothing became of it?
I beg your pardon?
Do you know why nothing became of it?
No, I mean the communists took over, I guess.
And are you aware that the communists made any restitution of any of the property
No, nothing.
that had been seized during World War II?
No, nothing.
Are you aware what property was restituted to the members of your family from Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer's estate after the war concluded?
You're not talking Czechoslovakia now.
No, I'm talking about any property at all, yes.
Yeah, a very small part.
Do you know precisely what was restituted?
A few paintings and a few pieces of china.
That's the total for all of the family members?
You're talking shares that you asked me about yesterday from the sugar industry, or are you talking about the artwork?
I was actually talking about all property. And Mr. Schoenberg did mention to you specifically shares yesterday.
Yes.
Is there a document that you're aware of that exists that lists all of the property that has been restituted to the family?
No. I haven't seen it, if it exists.
You've mentioned a number of paintings in your testimony. You've mentioned certain shares in the sugar factory.
Yes.
You've mentioned a few other articles of art like the porcelain.
Correct.
Are you aware of any other property that was restituted to any members of the family beyond those things that you've already mentioned?
No.
Are you aware of any other property that was delivered to your sister Louise?
My sister Louise did get a few more of the property because she was 50%, and only after her death her part was divided between her two children. So she got a few more things than I did, my brother Robert.
Do you know what those items were?
I know one was a Rodin, R-O-D-I-N, Rodin bust that she doesn't have it anymore. She sold it, and she also received a few more paintings than I did, which were all Austrian paintings, and. Just like me, she sold a number of them and kept a couple.
Are you aware how the decisions were made about which items you received and which items your sister Louise received?
No, because I lived here and they lived there, and I trusted her implicitly, and so she took what she liked, and then I got some other things that were left.
Do you know who made the decisions about who received what from the restituted property?
Well, as long as my sister was 50% of his inheritance, she chose apparently what she liked best, and then the rest was left for Robert and myself. There wasn't that much to begin with, so.
Do you know what Louise received in return for the sale of the Rodin and the amount of
No,
money?
I wish I would. I never found out. I don't think it was as much as it could have been, because I was never told how much she got for it. It was a small one. It was not a huge thing.
I read in one of the documents, I think, that it may not have been a real one.
That's
also.
that's another thing. Yeah.
Who knows?
I don't think she got a tremendous amount for it, because that she would have told me.
Would you place before the witness Exhibit 32, please?
Sure.
Mrs. Altmann, this document was shown to you by Mr. Schoenberg yesterday,
Yes.
and I believe that you testified that you believe the handwriting on the bottom of the page of Exhibit 32 is your brother Robert's. Is that correct?
No, it says unreadable signature.
He's talking about
Oh,
the
that
date.
one, the date, excuse me, that was my brother Robert, yes.
And you believe this is one of the documents that you received from Mrs. Auersberg? Is that correct?
Just a minute. Yeah. May I make a comment on this?
Yes, I actually was going to solicit your comment on this. You mentioned yesterday that you thought that there was something incorrect about this document.
Yes.
Is that the comment you wanted to make?
Yes.
Would
it
you
is
please tell me
totally-
what's incorrect?
It's totally incorrect that my uncle ever asked the gallery to keep the paintings in his house. He was the owner of those paintings. He gave one of the paintings to the gallery in 1936 and received a profuse thank you note thanking him and telling him how generous it was to do that. If he would have to request keeping the paintings at his house, they wouldn't have thanked him in a very elaborate way about parting with that painting. He owned these paintings. He didn't need any request to keep them in his house.
Anything else?
Oh, this was a painting that Führer got for himself, that the lawyer that was...
Now,
Yeah,
you
no,
base what you just testified to with respect to Exhibit 32 on your conclusions from this and other documents you received in and after 1998, is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, there were several documents that are quite totally clear that it was my uncle that owned the paintings and not my Aunt Adele.
But you only know that from your reading of documents in and after 1998, correct?
Well, yes, I mean, we all know it from these documents. I mean,
I simply meant that in drawing those conclusions, you weren't drawing upon any personal knowledge you had prior to the time that you had received these documents. Isn't that correct?
correct.
Before you move on, just note for the record that Exhibit 32, which we testified was a document that we received from Nellie Auersperg, appears to be a transcript of the letter that you just marked as Exhibit 60, which is the copy that was presumably found in the records of the Austrian gallery and sent to us by Mr. Czernin, but the text is pretty much the same.
Would you please place before the witness the document previously marked as Exhibit 36? This is also a document that you testified that you received from Nellie Auersperg in early 1998. You also made a comment, volunteered a comment on the record that you had not been aware of this document prior to 1998, or you would have done something about it. Do you recall making that comment?
I mean, yesterday I made
Yesterday,
that comment.
yes.
If you say so, I'm sure I made it.
I wonder if you recall what you meant by that.
Well, if I would have known that my uncle was the owner of the paintings, and not, as it is constantly spoken about, that it was her will that left the paintings to the gallery, I would have done something about it, but I wasn't aware of it.
Now, it appears, does it not, from this letter between your sister Louise and your brother Robert, that, no, I'm sorry, between Dr. Reinisch and your brother Robert, that your brother Robert was aware of these facts at this time in 1948, correct?
You're asking her if it appears from this document whether he was aware?
Yes.
You see, it's very difficult because he says on the one hand that it's definitely not a legal thing. On the other hand, he interprets the wish of my uncle to fulfill her request.
You're not listening to his question. Can you ask your question again?
So far as you know, Robert received this letter April 22 through Bryant, correct?
Oh, this one, yes. I only saw the 11th of April. Yes, April 22, correct.
1948, correct?
Yes.
And you're not aware how it is your sister came into possession of this particular letter, correct?
No idea.
But so far as you know, both of them were aware of the facts set forth in this letter in 1948, correct?
Yes.
Well, you meant the letter sent in 48, or that they were both aware in 1948? Because I think she testified that Louisa was either in Yugoslavia or Israel. at the
Louisa
time.
wasn't even in Vancouver at that time.
Where was Louisa at that time?
In Yugoslavia.
Okay, and she arrived in Canada in
I don't know exactly. This is all so long ago. She went from Yugoslavia. She was in prison after he was executed because she tried to escape, and then she went via Israel to Canada. But I couldn't tell you exactly when she arrived in Canada.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask for all of that information again. I simply meant that the best of your recollection, it was around 1949 that she arrived in Canada.
Definitely past 1948, but I don't know if it was 50 or 49 or 51. I don't know.
I understand that. But you have no idea when she came into possession of this information, is that correct?
Not exactly, no.
Okay. And you received it from...
That's nothing.
And you received it from Nellie Auersberg in March or April of 1998. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
I guess so, yes. See, there was so much my problem is only, I know all the documents, but which one was through Janine and which one came from Nellie is a little difficult, because I know there wasn't very much that I got from Nellie. It was a few sheets, but which one was hers and which one was his, I don't know exactly.
Okay. Yesterday you had indicated in response to Mr. Schoenberg's questioning that you thought this came from Nellie Auersberg.
Yeah.
You don't have any reason to doubt that as you
No, I
sit here
don't
today,
doubt
do you?
it. It must have come either from Nellie or from Janine.
You also testified yesterday that you remembered hearing for the first time that there was an issue in Austria with regard to the Klimt paintings in March of 1998 when you were at the hospital with your sister Louise. Do you recall that?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you recall learning at that time regarding the Klimt paintings?
Well, you see, my sister at that time was partly in and out of consciousness. And it wasn't me who told her about that letter. I think it probably was her son. I don't know exactly who informed her of that news of Vienna. And the only thing she said is, we will need a very good lawyer now. And the next thing is she died within a week after that. So I wasn't concerned about the legal matters at that time.
I'm interested in hearing what it was that you were informed to which your sister Louise reacted that she would need to get a good lawyer. What was the substance of the information?
The unfortunate thing is, it was not a direct phone call that I got. It was Dr. Sturm had called my sister-in-law Thea Blochbauer, Thea Bentley, and told her that something came up in Vienna that is beginning to doubt that the Klimt paintings are in the gallery. And so Thea came to the hospital to talk to us. But it was a very difficult time for all of us with my sister dying, and so not much attention was paid to it.
What was the best recollection you have of what was told to you by Thea at that time?
The newspaper came out in Vienna that said that there are great doubts that Klimts are hanging in the gallery and that they actually don't belong to the gallery. And so it was then that, after my sister passed away, that we went into the legal aspects of it.
And in what way did you go into the legal aspects of it?
We got into communication with Randolph Schoenberg.
When was the first conversation that you had with Mr. Schoenberg in response to that information that you received in March of 1998?
Took a while. My sister was buried in April. Randy, you have to help me. Was it June? Was it?
I'm just looking
You
for
want
your
her
best recollection, and
I can tell you what it is, but you can get
I
her
don't know, that's,
recollection
I,
first. That's
yeah,
fine.
that's fine.
I'm very sorry, but I'm usually good in memory, but there was so much going on with her death, and we went back and forth, and I went to Vancouver twice, and I think it was either in the late summer. We didn't do anything right away.
Okay. The articles that had been published, I take it that they were published in Austria, the articles
Yes.
that Thea referred to.
Yes, it was, I think they said that the members of the Green Party had, and others had their doubts. But I never met anybody. in
Did
that
you
group.
obtain copies of those articles?
No.
Do you recall any further details that you received at that point in time regarding this question of the ownership of the Klimt paintings?
No.
What discussions did you have with Dr. Sturm at the time regarding any information that he was
I
providing?
never even talked to him personally at that time. I talked to him last summer, but at that time it was his wife who called me, and she was horribly upset, and she said, "You can't do that," because he wrote, and he was so sure that he would get it, that he put his name out, and now he would be in a horrible condition if you don't give it to him. And I just said, we can't. And Nellie agreed with me. She said, we can't do that. We had signed up with Mr. Schoenberg, and we can't go back on it. I even told him, if you would have told us sooner, it might have been our decision to go along with you. But at this point, we can't do it.
When did that conversation take place?
No, well, that's the problem. I would want the date, and I can't tell you the date. It must have been, maybe Nellie would know. It was, I guess, the summer of 98 or 99.
Let me ask the question a little differently. The conversation with Mr. Sturm's wife,
Yeah, Elizabeth.
to which you just referred,
Yeah,
took place after Mr. Schoenberg was retained in connection with
Correct.
these matters?
only a few days before. I mean, a few days after Mr. Schoenberg was retained.
Okay, so if we can fix that date and time, then you'd be able to
Fine.
say
yeah.
that the conversation you had that you just referred to occurred a few days after that.
Correct.
Now,
Feel very bad. I don't know when I signed up with
you know what you- I know you did, but I don't know what I've done with it.
but I guess you know it.
It's okay.
My age is letting me down after all.
Don't put your hand.
Hmm?
Don't put your hand on me.
It's 43. Would you put Exhibit 43 before the witness, please?
Sure.
I don't have my copy, so if you could lay that
Oh.
flat when you're done, I just want to make reference to the date.
That is 11th of May. The way he writes it is not different to the American way.
Yeah. The letter is dated 11th of May, but there's a fax date at the top of September 21, 98.
I'm
He
just-
wrote it in May and sent it to us in September.
Mrs. Altmann, it's exactly your knowledge of this document that's been marked as Exhibit 43 that I wanted to explore a bit with you.
I didn't get this letter.
Well, that was my first question for you. When was the first time you saw that letter?
Recently, I didn't get this letter. I got this horrified call from his wife.
I appreciate that, and I'm just trying to clear up a few questions I
Yes,
have about
go ahead.
the
Yeah.
sequence of events. Did you have any communication with, is it Mrs. Sturm? Is that how I would refer to his wife?
Yeah.
Okay. Mrs. Sturm, the conversation you had with her was later in 1998, well
Much
after May.
later.
Okay. And the conversation that you understand took place between Thea Bentley
Yes.
and Mr. Sturm took place sometime in mid-March 1998, correct?
Must have been because she came to the hospital and told us those things.
Okay. And had you any communications with Mr. Sturm or Mrs. Sturm between March 1998 and the occasion for your telephone call with Mrs. Sturm that took place a few days after Mr. Schoenberg's retention?
None whatsoever. My only communication with Mrs. Sturm was she bought some of the articles that I inherited and sold to her. And she was a good friend. Both of them were friends of my sister.
And you don't know what the nature of the communications between Thea Bentley and Mr. Sturm were that would have caused him to have written the letter on behalf of the heirs of Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer on May 11,
No, I
1998.
assure you that Thea had no idea about that because I asked her after that all came about. She had no idea. None of us did. And if he would have asked us before, it's very possible that they would have wanted him to take that as his assignment. But he never even contacted us before.
And by the time you learned of his letter purportedly on behalf of the heirs, you'd already retained Mr. Schoenberg
Yes,
to act in
and
the
my
same
niece
capacity.
Nellie agreed with me totally that this was very uncalled for.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we are friends now, but at the time it was very uncalled for.
Did Mrs. Sturm tell you what had caused Dr. Sturm to write this letter supposedly on behalf of the heirs of Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer in May of 1998?
Well, she was great friends. Both of them were great friends of my sister. And with me, there was nothing. I mean, I knew them only for buying a few of my things. But they were great friends of my sister, and apparently they assumed that when those first things in Vienna came up, that my sister would let them handle the case.
Do you know whether your sister Louise spoke to Dr. Sturm regarding the Klimt paintings prior to her death?
No, I have no idea. I'm sure she didn't.
Would you show the witness Exhibit 48, please? You recall testifying about Exhibit 48 yesterday, Mrs. Altmann?
Yes.
And this is your submission in connection with the petition for the reduction of court fees
Correct,
in connection with the Austrian litigation.
correct.
There is no reference in this document to your home as one of your assets. Is that correct?
Yes, I even say that we bought the house in 1975 and it's part of my assets.
There's no value listed under item 1 on page 2 with respect to the
Well, I
value
say
of
for
the
what
house.
we
Is that
bought
correct?
it.
I'm sorry, you have to, if you wouldn't mind, please allow me to finish my questions. It says what it was purchased for, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
And where does that appear?
at the bottom, I said the house was paid out in 1975 for approximately 900,000 Austrian shillings.
Mr. Cooper, she's looking at the first page, and I think you're looking at the second page. That might be
I see,
a problem.
okay. You're on the first page, and the reference there is to the purchase price of the house, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and what was the value of the house on the date that you submitted this document to the Austrian court?
One little higher probably. Well, when was it? I mean,
Just say if you know. It's
oh, September 99. Well, I don't know what it was at the time. I'm sure it was more.
Do you know what it's worth today?
I think today they said it's approximately $750,000.
And on what is that based?
Pardon me?
On what is that value based, to your knowledge?
And the neighborhood things, the real estate people that came by and wanted to know if I want to sell it. It's around 700,000.
Do you recall why you didn't put the current value of the house on this submission when it was made to the Austrian court?
It doesn't say that what it was. I mean, I can only say what I actually paid for it, but the other thing is just an assumption. It's not what you actually can get for it. I put down everything that I owned.
The court granted, in part, your application for a reduction of the court fees, correct?
Pardon me?
The Austrian court granted in part your request for a reduction of the court fees, correct?
Yes, but I understand it was still too high. I would have had to mortgage my house in order to pay for it.
You chose not to appeal that decision, correct?
I'm going to object to the extent that it calls for attorney-client communications. If you can answer without disclosing any communications we had.
If I objected to it, I don't quite understand.
Yes, if you...
Well, I believe I'm going to get an appropriate objection in a moment, but the question was simply, you recall that you had the opportunity to appeal the decision not to further reduce the court fees. You just mentioned the fact that they didn't reduce them as far as you wanted them to, correct?
Yes.
Yes. And you chose not to appeal that decision to a higher Austrian court.
Object, that assumes that there were even grounds for appeal, but if you can answer the question, go ahead.
I don't know. I live here. I don't know.
So you don't recall anything regarding the decision to appeal or not appeal this decision, is that correct?
I understood that I couldn't afford it because I know what they asked for it to begin with, and I thought I could never afford it.
I meant the fact that there was a further avenue available to you in the Austrian court system to seek further reduction of the fees.
Objection states facts not in evidence. I mean, if you want, we can stipulate to the fact that no appeal was filed by us. there was an appeal filed by Austria, but we certainly did not file an appeal.
I was told that it
That's-
is...
you don't have to say
yeah.
what you were told. That's attorney-client
I'm not
privilege.
seeking any communications between you and Mr. Schoenberg in connection with this. I was trying to understand whether you understood that you had the ability to appeal and whether you had made a deliberate choice not to do so.
I'm going to object. It calls for attorney-client communications and also assumes facts not in evidence.
And you're instructing the witness not to answer.
Yeah, I'm going to instruct her not to answer that.
You testified yesterday that the proceeds of the sale of some of the property that was restituted to you.
Property.
Yes, in particular, I think you were referring to
The porcelain.
some of the porcelain.
Yes.
Although I don't know that that was all of the property that was referenced in the exhibit. I was really not focused on the exhibit so much as I was on the payments to the Fried Frank firm.
Correct.
To which
It
you
was
identified.
the entire money that I received for that we received for the porcelain.
What was the total amount paid, to the best of your knowledge, to the Fried
It
Frank
was
firm?
approximately $100,000.
Was that the entire amount that was paid to it, or only from that particular source?
Excuse me, you're talking about the porcelain?
No. Do you know what the total dollar amount of all monies paid to the Fried Frank firm in connection with this matter
Was
were?
$100,000.
Total from beginning to end?
Yes.
Okay.
They worked on a very small percentage.
Of the litigation?
Pardon me?
What do you mean by your last comment? They worked
Well,
on a very
you are
small
surprised
percentage.
that it was so little.
Actually, I didn't express any surprise at all.
No,
But I didn't understand your
you
last
said
comment.
he said all the amount, and I said yes, it was all the amount.
I simply meant the entire amount paid to them was the $100,000
Yes.
that was paid from the proceeds of the porcelain sale.
Correct.
Okay. What did you mean by working for such a small percentage?
Well, when you said, is that all? I said yes, it was all.
A percentage of what?
Their legal fees.
Were their legal fees based in some fashion on a percentage of some figure? Do you understand my question?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand what you meant by a percentage when referencing the fees.
Well, I think they worked for what was called the pro bono, was the legal term. I'm not a lawyer. I just know that they worked for what I thought very fair amount of money. It has nothing to do with the case. I don't even know why we discuss it.
It was offered as testimony yesterday, and I'm attempting to understand it.
It was offered as testimony yesterday.
Yes. This whole question of the amount of money you received from the porcelain and the payment to Fried Frank.
Yeah, you said, yeah, I said that amount of porcelain was paid in total to cover the legal fee of Fried Frank, and yeah.
And Fried Frank ceased being your counsel in this case at some time shortly after that payment was made?
I beg your pardon?
Fried Frank ceased being your counsel in this case sometime
Yes.
shortly after that payment was made, is that correct?
Yes.
And you have separate financial arrangements with Mr. Schoenberg from whatever financial arrangements were made with Fried Frank with respect to
Totally
payment for this
separate.
case? Let me go back to. What are your financial arrangements with Mr. Schoenberg with respect to the payment for his services in connection with the case?
I'm con-
I think
trying
this-
to, if I could interject and ask what the relevance, what relevance that would have in the case.
I believe that the reason that the testimony was offered yesterday is that Mrs. Altmann was attempting to demonstrate that her inability to pay a substantial amount in Austria for the court fees was as represented in the petition and in other documents that have been submitted to the courts, and that an effort was being made to demonstrate that the proceeds from the porcelain sale had gone directly to counsel and was not otherwise available for other purposes, including the court fees. So I think given the fact that Mrs. Altmann's financial wherewithal and her ability to pay court fees or counsel fees has been pled and made the subject of voluntary testimony, we're entitled to the remainder of the information on that same topic. For instance, her choice and ability to pay you.
I don't understand that. I'm going to instruct you not to answer. Well, let me think about it. Generally the arrangement the client has with a lawyer is not privileged. The relevance of this testimony was really just to correct you so that you don't stop representing to the court that she got $1 million from the porcelain and drawings, which you have represented to the Ninth Circuit incorrectly. Her relationship with me, which really has nothing to do with that, I don't see is relevant in any way. Can I confer with my client briefly?
Sure, that's fine.
I'll just take this off for a second.
Off the record.
You're asking to go off the record?
Yeah, please.
Going off the record at 2:37 p.m.
I beg your pardon?
Going back on the record at 2:39 p.m.
Okay. Can you ask the question again?
What's your financial arrangement with Mr. Schoenberg in connection with his representation of you
Mr.
in this
Schoenberg is
lawsuit?
working for me on contingency.
Okay. Do you know what the terms of the contingency are?
That I'm going to object.
I don't think
in
that
its-
is anybody's business except mine.
I'm going to object on relevance grounds there because the percentage of the contingency has nothing to do with any of the issues that you raised or any of the issues that we raised.
I think you've already identified that the subject of the relationship, the financial interest in the lawsuit, is not privileged. I think it's certainly within the ambit of what has been made relevant by Mrs. Altmann's contentions in the case, and I see no reason why allowing her to complete this questioning is properly the subject of an instruction not to answer.
That's fine, but you can. Well, I'm still instructing her not to answer any further questions with regard to our financial arrangement.
Mrs. Altmann, returning for a moment to Exhibit 36, would you put that back in front of you, please?
36.
Is that someone? That's one we've talked about here. Okay.
You recall that you testified that you would have done something about this had you learned of the contents of this letter prior to March of 1998.
Yes.
What would you have done?
It calls for speculation.
What did you mean when you said you would have done something?
I would have probably looked for a legal representation because it was a request and not a legal obligation.
Representation to do what?
To do something in that case because the paintings were taken out of the house in the years following 1938 and without any right or legal, they were taken.
You would have done something to seek legal counsel to obtain the return of the paintings.
Objection, again, it's calling for speculation and hypothetical percipient testimony.
I'm asking the witness what she meant. Is that what you meant?
Again, same objection.
Mrs. Altmann.
I would have looked into it more clearly.
Okay, let's take a short break. I'm going to just see if there's anything else I want to ask.
Okay.
Coming off the record at 2:42 p.m. Going back on the record at 2:44 p.m.
Mrs. Altmann, one of the paintings that's included as the subject of your claims in this lawsuit is the painting that we've referred to a couple of times yesterday and today of Amelie Zuckerkandl.
Yes,
Now, that painting was not the subject of Adela Blockbauer's will, is that correct?
no, correct.
And it didn't play any role in any of the other facts about which you've testified in the last day and a half.
Correct.
What's your understanding of why it's included within the complaint in this action?
It's included because I read from a letter from my brother that it was hanging in my uncle's bedroom at the time, and he wanted to know what became of it. And that is really my only knowledge of it. I have not seen the painting because I didn't go into my uncle's bedroom. I
And-
just get it from this letter that it was there.
And you have no knowledge that would suggest that that painting was included in any of the communications or transactions between Dr. Rienisch and the Austrian government during 1948. Is that correct?
No, I just saw that letter of my brother Robert saying whatever happened to that painting that was in my uncle's bedroom.
And
I
that's
s-
the sole information you have
That's
with
the
respect to
sole
the Amelie
information.
Zuckerkandl painting. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay. I have what? Would you put Exhibit 40 before the witness, please? Is that the letter to which you just referred as the
Yes,
letter from your brother?
yeah,
This is the document marked for identification purposes 00976, marked yesterday as Exhibit 40, bearing the date February 17, 1979. Is that correct?
yeah,
And that's the only information about the Amelie Zuckerkandl painting that you have. Is that correct?
yeah. He writes, did you have it translated at the bottom? That my brother writes it would be highly interested for him to find out how come it went into the possession of Müller-Hofmann.
You have no personal knowledge about
No,
how
I
it got
don't.
into the possession of
No, I
Müller-Hofmann.
don't.
Is that
I
correct?
know nothing about it.
Objection, it also states the fact not in evidence. And I actually believe it's not true. I should explain that. Not true that the painting ever was in the possession of the Müller-Hofmann family. But I don't believe Mrs. Altmann has any percipient knowledge of that.
Let's just clarify that. You have no percipient knowledge
No.
of any of the contents of this letter, is that
No,
correct?
nothing. I remember the Müller-Hofmanns from as a social contact, but that's all.
At this time in 1979, Robert Bentley was still representing the interests of the family with respect to attempting to obtain the return of property from your uncle's estate, is that correct?
Yes.
Counsel, reserving our right to take a discovery deposition at an appropriate time in the litigation, and based on the questioning you have made of Mrs. Altmann yesterday and this morning, I have no further questions at this time.
Okay. I should add, we've had discussions prior to the stipulation for this deposition, stipulation which is attached to Exhibit 1 to the deposition with regard to any further depositions, and I know we don't yet have an agreement with regard to any further depositions. I know it's your position that you're entitled to take another deposition asking the same things, and we have not yet agreed to that, but we've agreed to postpone our disagreement and deal with it at another date.
Shall we go off the record to reach an agreement with respect to the handling of this transcript?
Give me 1 second. I may have a follow-up question or two. Okay. Let's yeah, I have a few more questions. What exhibit number are we on, by the way?
Next is 68.
68?
It ends at 67.
Let's mark as, if I have enough copies.
She is
Yes.
68 here.
Okay. 1 second. Let's mark as Exhibit 68 a copy of a April 11th, 2000 letter from Nellie Auersperg to Professor Bacher, with an attached letter sent from Minnie Müller-Hofmann to Nellie's mother, Louisa. This was taken from a report prepared by Professor Bacher with regard to the portrait of Amalia Zuckerkandel.
Counsel, I trust this is going to be directly related to some testimony Mrs. Altmann gave on cross,
I think
which is the only possible ground for proper redirect.
the answer to that question is yes.
I reserve judgment on that subject until I've heard your questions, but there's nothing about the document that strikes me as likely in that category.
When counsel asked you whether you had any other information with regard to the portrait of Amalia Zuckerkandel, Did you understand him to be asking with regard to other documents that we might have collected in the last few years with regard to that painting?
Leading.
I don't think we have any documents.
Okay, well, have you ever seen this document before?
Well,
Objected
this was
it
a letter.
exceeds-
You call it a document. I saw that letter that Nelly wrote to Professor Bacher.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that.
The proper
I have
scope
it.
of redirect.
Okay. Do you know what the second page of Exhibit 68 is? You're looking at it now?
Yes.
What is that?
Well, it's a letter to my sister from Minnie Müller-Hoffmann.
Okay. And have you read this letter before today?
Yes. She's 84 in that letter.
Yeah. Does Minnie Müller-Hoffmann say in this letter how Dr. Vita Künstler obtained the portrait of her mother, Amalia Zuckerkandel?
Document
Through
speaks for itself.
Dr.
It's hearsay.
Kalia.
I'm sorry, what was the answer?
She says the portrait of Mama is now with Mrs. Vita Künstler, an art historian, who got the painting through Dr. Kalia.
Okay.
She called me recently and told me that it was willed to the gallery in the Belvedere. It's okay with me.
Okay.
But it doesn't say anything how Mrs. Künstler came to get the painting through Dr. Kalia.
Right. Okay. Exhibit 60. No, I'm not going to ask any further questions, actually. That's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Altmann.
Thank you.
Going off the record at 2:55 p.m.